Henry George, a monumental economist from Monumental Stories on Instagram. Henry George was an American political economist and journalist whose funeral was one of the largest ever seen in New York. George's writing was immensely popular in 19th century America and sparked several reform movements of the Progressive era. George argued that a single tax on land values would create a more productive and just society. George wrote his most famous work, Progress and Poverty, in 1879, selling millions of copies worldwide. Other works by George defended free trade, the secret ballot, high taxation on landowners building expensive infrastructures, and public ownership of natural monopolies. George's popularity led him to run twice for mayor of New York City. In 1886, he received 31% of the vote, finishing ahead of Theodore Roosevelt. In 1897, George died of a stroke 4 days before the election. An estimated 100,000 people visited Grand Central Palace to see his face, with the same number held back outside by police. The New York Times reported that later in the evening, a funeral procession of about 2,000 people left Grand Central Palace for Brooklyn, all the way, thronged on either side by crowds of silent watchers. The crowd at Brooklyn City Hall was the densest ever seen there, thousands on thousands, so far back that they could not see the procession. The Times wrote, "Rarely has such an enormous crowd turned out in Brooklyn on any occasion, but nevertheless, the slow tolling of the City Hall bell and the regular beating of drums were the only sounds that broke the stillness. Anything more impressive could not be imagined. At Court Street, the casket was transferred to a hearse and taken to a private funeral at Greenwood. Commentators disagreed on whether it was the largest funeral in New York history or the largest since the death of Abraham Lincoln. The New York Times reported, "Not even Lincoln had a more glorious death." Even the more conservative New York Sun wrote that, "Since the Civil War, few announcements have been more startling than that of the sudden death of Henry George."